AIM is the Asian Americans in Media Association, with the mission of empowering our communities, advancing our leaders, and sharing our voices and stories. If you'd like to learn more about AIM, come talk to me after the panel, or also Ali, who is also part of the org. Today we'll be talking about DEI best practices to attract and retain talent with DEI leaders in the industry. And this discussion will be led by Radia Barnes, NAMIC and New York president.
Thank you. I have to say, AIM is such a fantastic organization. I've partnered with them so many times. Asian Americans in Media. One of the founders, Gloria Lee, is a great friend of mine. She's fantastic. She works over at Google. She's one of the hardest working women that I know. She juggles so much, and she's very passionate about advancing the work of Asians in media, and Asians in general, not just in media. We won't be media snobs here, even though we're in the communications industry. So yes, thank you, AIM, for partnering with me, helping me to put together this fantastic panel. Listen, this is a powerhouse panel right here. You guys are in for a treat. Love, love, love the energy that we're gonna be bringing to the room this morning. My name is Radia Barnes. I am the president of the New York chapter of NAMIC. I've been the president, this is my second term, so that will be 4 years. Before that, I was the vice president, and before that, I was the programming chair. So I love NAMIC. It's my passion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion is just something that I think we all, in our personal lives and in our work lives, can benefit from. And it's so good that we're able to come together finally in person. It's so great to see everyone. We were living in a virtual world for so long, and it's just, this is almost surreal to me to see everyone like in person. So great, so welcome everybody. So I'm gonna have my esteemed panelists introduce themselves, starting all the way down at the end at Jessica.
Hello. Can you all, is this on? No?
Sure.
Okay. Hello, everyone. Good morning. My name is Jessica Guerrero, and I'm the Global Head of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion for Google Cloud Go-to-Market. I'm happy to be with you all today. Thank you.
Hello, everyone. My name is Jim.
Mike's a strong.
All right. Yeah, we're good. Hello, everyone. My name is Demetrius Thornton. I am the Chief Diversity Officer and Vice President of all of our talent management programs for Madison Square Garden Sports and Entertainment. Really excited to be here with you today and to learn from our esteemed panelists, as well as talk about strategies that we're all embedding at our companies.
Hello, I'm Serena Fong. I'm Vice President of DEI Partnerships for the Michael J. Fox Foundation for Parkinson's Research. I do have tiebacks to the communications media industry in that prior to my work in the DEI field, so to speak, I was a television news producer for a long time, 13 years. The familiarity with mics. So, working at a variety of outlets such as MSNBC, Court TV, ABC, and Fox News.
Thank you. Yeah, I just turn these off.
Buenos días.
Buenos días.
Salvador Mendoza with NBC Universal. I've been in, I grew up in Chicago, so if you're from Chicago, there you go, one person. I love to shout out to Chicago. I grew up in Chicago, originally from Honduras, and now I've been in New York for a little bit over 10 years in the Diversity and Inclusion Office at NBC Universal. So looking forward to the conversation.
Thank you. Before we kick it off, I'm just going to throw my glasses on really quick. I just want to read something. One of the trends that... Okay, let's try it now. One of the trends that arose from the pandemic has been the Great Resignation, also known as the Big Quit. I never heard that term, the big quit, so that was very interesting to hear. To describe the deluge of employees who began quitting their jobs in or around April 2021 and continuing with a record high of 4.5 million workers resigning last November alone. As a result, employers across several industries are left scrambling to fill open positions. Along with a reduction in customers, staffing shortages and employee turnover are wreaking havoc on companies' financial stability. What are the employees saying? They're saying they want an increase in employee compensation and perks, and also that they have options. So we're kind of feeling ourselves right now like we have options. But money enough isn't enough in itself to retain workers. Job fulfillment and the ability for one to feel that they are their true selves at work have been ranked second and third among employees considering a job change. Some quick statistics: 1 in 5 workers plan to quit their jobs in 2022. Although most are seeking higher salaries, over 2/3 say they are seeking more fulfillment in the workplace. Today, we're going to talk about this, and we're going to talk about how our DE&I strategy can be used as a retention tool to kind of help not only retain your employees, but attract some as well. So I'm going to start with Serena. I want to know, Serena, why is it important for leaders like yourself to foster a sense of belonging within your organizations, and how does that directly impact DE&I?
Thank you for the question, and also I want to just thank, I meant to do this earlier, but again, 3 years out of practice of in-person. We're all yeah. So I do want to thank AIM and NAMIC for inviting me to participate, because it goes to the answer to your question, which is that it's a passion of mine, and it is so important because not only have I experienced what it means to feel that I belong to an organization that keeps me there, but then also what it means to me and having to know and see role models who have acted as inclusive leaders. And so I think that is why it's critical, frankly, for all of us to behave in this way. And I do think that it doesn't matter what role you have, it doesn't matter where you are in terms of level or even where you are in terms of your own career path. All of us can be inclusive leaders. All of us can act inclusively. And by doing that, we were talking earlier about the importance of this and about success and what and our accomplishments. This work is not something that you're just like, okay, we did this, so we're done. It is long, it is incremental, and it is something that is just ongoing throughout your life. So that's why it's so important that we all behave and lead inclusively, and stress that importance and be very intentional around that.
Intentional, I think that is like the word. Now, Jessica, what do you think about that?
Well, I feel like at the core of the issue when we talk about inclusion and belonging, ultimately what people want is to be respected as individuals. They want to feel trusted to do their work and bring their best skill set and self to work, their authentic selves. They want to be valued for who they are, and they want to be celebrated. And when we think about, what that all rolls up to is really dignity in the workplace. So, companies now are fully understanding that in order to, whether this is a business case or a moral case, in order to get the most out of their employees, they have to support them in these ways, right? So it's a both and versus a either or. And so many companies similar to Google, are taking a stance to really putting belonging and inclusion at the heart of their DEI strategy, right? It's not fully about representation, right? That's just the beginning. That's part of the issue. It's really how can we cultivate an environment where everyone, no matter their identities, their circumstances, their issues, their skill sets, their backgrounds, can belong. And that's more about the hard work and how we interact and how the norms that we put in place, the expectations we put in place, how we hold leaders accountable, the more systemic changes, right, that reward or address behavior that's not in line with those goals. And so, to your question about the pandemic, You know, I think there was, you called it the great resignation, but I think it was a great awakening, with people to really understand and explore what their real values are and how this shouldn't be a decentralized experience, but it should be harmonious. And so when we go to work and we're at home and whatever we do, right, those core tenets of being respected and being valued, being seen as credible, et cetera, are consistent across all the different, spaces they occupy in their day to day.
Website, your DE&I page is amazing. Your employee resource groups. I have a colleague here of mine. We are the leads of the Black ERG at our company, and I said we need to model after. I mean, Google is amazing. So I really see where you put it out for the public to know, but you also, inside are practicing what you preach, which I think is so important. I wanted to ask Salvador, because I've known you for a little bit of time. We won't go into it, but I know that you are a fantastic leader. But how do you personally bring a sense of belonging to your company? Are there any kind of steps that you take, or is there any secrets that you have?
I don't know secrets, but it's intentionality, right? You hear all of this in authenticity, and you hear everything, especially now when we talked about a sense of belonging, be authentic, bring yourself to work. But the reality is that if you're like me, oftentimes you have you also hear the term code switch, right? And be aware of what's going on and assimilate and all of that extent. As I mentioned before, I was born in Honduras, moved to Chicago when I was 14 years old, didn't speak the language, was undocumented for some time. So as an individual that has grown, and I grew up in the southeast side of Chicago, as an individual that has grown in that context, in that community, and now over 25 years in corporate America, yes, there's a level into which I have played all of those games, right? But I think now, as I have progressed in my where I am professionally, it's not that I will say, when you hear the phrase "keeping it real," and I always say, yes, keep it real, be authentic, but also have situational awareness. Yes. And I think that what I have attributed a lot into how I navigated where I am and where I've been is a sense of belonging and confidence and who I am. Yes, even with an accent. And I always tell people situational awareness is key, because I can articulate and I can conjugate my verbs and sentences properly when I'm speaking with certain individuals in the company, but I also speak hood, right? So I grew up in the hood. I also speak hood, and I can do that. So I always say that it's authenticity is key, but also have situational awareness where you've been. That I attribute a lot as to how I navigated. I spent time in non-for-profits in my earlier career. Then I went to work for a couple of universities in higher education, then hospitality, and now media and entertainment. So all of that combined is to say, yeah, authenticity is key, but also have situational awareness as to where you are, to get to where you want to be, and also to achieve. From a DEI perspective, I'm fully aware, and I think most of us are, if you're in this space, that I don't have a direct authority to say this has to be done. I always say is that I achieve change through influence and collaboration. And influence and collaborations comes from a place of trusting somebody. Yes. And I would like to think that the way that I approach this and the way that I communicate with folks give me that sense.
Listen, I love that. And you are so relatable. And I think that is important to have leaders that look like ourselves, who feel comfortable. We feel comforted. We feel like this is home. We can be ourselves around certain people. So I love that, you keep it real. Always. Demetrius, I wanted to ask you, what are some of the barriers? Now, you're over at Madison Square Garden.
Right.
I have so many initials in my head. Huge company, a lot. what are some barriers that you've been facing trying to implement your DE&I strategy?
So keeping it real. No, I think there are a few things I would approach this. MSG, we're actually positioned very well because of some of the moves that we've made in terms of combining diversity and inclusion and talent. And I'll talk about a little bit about that. But historically, what I found is the barriers to entry, to access, or even having conversations about DE&I has everything to do with kind of who we are shaped as humans. And I'll kind of tell you a story working in politics and government before coming to sports and entertainment. Oftentimes in government, you're trying to solve a problem that will never be fixed, right? Like homelessness will never be, there will always be some level of homelessness that exists. And I remember speaking to a very senior leader in the city of New York, and they say, you know, people may not actually want to solve homelessness, they may not want to see it. They just don't want to see it, right? And so sometimes the barriers that we all face, or when we're talking about this work, is not that you don't want it to change, you just don't want to see it. You don't want to deal with it, right? And so for us at MSG, when I say we are incredibly positioned well, is because we've kind of taken a note out of the page of, you know, sometimes people say one thing and maybe do another, right? I always say, you're not going to tell the chief diversity guy you're not committed to D&I. Like, who's going to tell me that, right? Nobody's going to say that to me, right? So what we have done is we have actually combined our talent management system as well as diversity and inclusion. And what that means is everything from performance management, learning development, who gets promoted, how our programs are established, who are the future leaders, who are the emerging talents, who are the people who are considered enterprise talent. Everything is connected to diversity and inclusion. So that if you're going to be promoted, then you have to be able to show and demonstrate how you've built an inclusive team, right? So we have tied everything together so that D&I is not just in an island on its own, but the influence, the strategy, but the purpose, the practices, and the policies are actually embedded together. And we can talk about that a little bit more today.
Oh, listen, I love that. I think I'm gonna write that down and like bring that to the powers that be. Jessica, I wanted to ask, so with your DE&I strategies, are there any initiatives that you might have implemented that kind of help build upon and you kind of combine them and help them with your D&I goals? So is there anything like an initiative that you may have started or initiative that Google has and you have, you know, kind of brought it full circle and now it's part of your D&I strategy?
Absolutely. And I mentioned this when we were having a conversation, the panelists and I, before this started. You know, Google has what we consider open source culture. You know, us being a tech company, you know, when you think about coding language, open source means anyone can contribute to a thing and have it be part of a thing. And so I feel like everything that's a part of our DEI strategy has started with the community first and a partnership with, you know, the leadership, frontline managers, DEI practitioners and experts, et cetera, to kind of come together collaboratively to, you know, really put together what our DEI strategy is. But some of the things I'll highlight in that regard have been, you know, we have our internal kind of motto around DEI that everyone owns it. It's everyone's responsibility. So even the core DEI teams that spend 100% of their time on DEI don't fully own the work, right? We do it in partnership with leadership councils, employee resource groups, very senior leaders. Even our Alphabet board has a role and a hand in our DEI strategy. So everyone is a part of it. And as a result, you know, it's embedded in how we approach the work. In the summer of 2020, however, during the George Floyd murder, we had a global uprising around this issue. Google did launch our company-wide racial equity commitments. And how this really was designed was a full partnership with all those different stakeholders and even more community, activist groups and other types of nonprofits that we support to really better understand how can we support our Black community from end to end. And end to end not only means our employees and our organization, but also the community at large in the world, and not just the United States, but Black communities around the world. And so that was something that started as PMO or kind of project management group that was ad hoc in nature, that is now integrated at the core of our DEI strategy. And this looks like increasing our Black representation in all levels of our leadership, as well as all levels of employment, to expanding DEI teams to focus specifically on the Black experience internally at Google. So we have a team called the Stay and Thrive team, which is a retention and progression team to ensure, and they not only focus on Black plus, and we use plus for people who identify as Black and other identities as well. But their primary focus and their strategy is built around the needs of the Black community internally in Google. We have a number of efforts externally that Google is driving. One I lead in particular in cloud called Products for Good, where we actually invest in Black-owned banks and other businesses to ensure that for the populations that they serve in the community, they're well positioned from a digital transformation perspective to ensure that they can scale and grow and have the resources to support the community in order for the community to thrive. So there's a number of things that start as these ideas that might be advocated by these different stakeholders that, find its way to be a part of our strategy, and then ultimately it becomes everyone's responsibility to make sure that we have success.
Amazing. That's all I have to say about that. Yes, I love that. So I'm going to ask Demetrius, Serena, and Salvador this same question. What tools or initiatives have you actually implemented that have helped you overcome any challenges that you may have had with your DE&I initiatives? And we can start with Demetrius.
Wow. So starting internally first, we know that across many companies and organizations, diversity and inclusion, or being able to attract people of different groups, is really not the problem. The problem is once you get to director level and above. Like, that's where you begin to see the precipitous drop off of people who have made it past manager, senior manager, and then there's a drop off. So again, speaking to that point, we have analyzed the data. We've done multiple pulse surveys to recognize that, one, when we have conversations, my dear esteemed colleague here mentioned George Floyd, right? What I was saying on my end is that it was really tough for people to talk about race, particularly from a manager and employee perspective. But what was interesting, people weren't even talking about their careers, right? So we were shocked to find that managers were not even having conversations with their directs about how they will grow their careers. So of course you're not going to have conversations about what's happening in society. We're not even talking about your career. So one of the things that we rolled out was a less talk approach. And so where most people have performance reviews for maybe mid-year and year-end, what we've just rolled out at MSG is a quarterly approach. So every single quarter, you're talking to your teams about their careers and what is happening and what they can do. Because the challenge is, we also know the data that says for Black women, they get feedback that they can't actually use or help them to grow their careers. If you are in the AAPI community, sometimes you are really pushed towards technical roles, but not the roles that are business development, the roles that are actually pitching, the roles that are actually in the front. And so when we're thinking about those different groups, we're embedding that into our strategy. Now, what that means is, as a manager, you are held accountable for making sure that you have the conversation we've built into the system, and we can track whether or not you've had a conversation with your employee, right? So we've actually just rolled that out. So quarterly conversation, we have themes connected to it. And in addition to that, if you don't know how to have a conversation with your employees about their careers, we will give you a template. So we actually devise a plan and a template that you follow these questions, so that by the end of the year, we know where this employee is and we know what their aspirations are. Because the other data, and I'm a big data guy, the other data that we know is that oftentimes people who are in different diverse groups or people of color, however we want to say it in the room, they're in roles longer, right? So it may take you 6 or 7 or 8 years before you can move on to the next level, where some other of our colleagues are maybe doing it in 2, right? Let's crack that code. So quarterly performance and quarterly conversations is actually a part of our strategy, and it's embedded, and we hold people accountable to it. The second thing is really my passion is talent reviews, right? And essentially what a talent review is, for those who may not know, it is what happens in the room to determine who gets promoted, right? Promotion and advancement is art and science, right? Oftentimes people in different groups, they want to know, so what do I need to do to be promoted? And your manager's like, well, if you do this and I give you this project and you take this stretch and, okay, great, I'll do it, and nothing happens, right? So, we've heard things that we call flag on the play. So my team goes in the room, if we hear, and you say, well, she has sharp elbows. Flag on the play, what does that mean? Right? Because we already know the data tells us that women and people of color, particularly Black people, they have to have their personality mentioned in performance reviews in order to grow. So they're nice, they're great, we really like working with them, right? That kind of thing. So personality gets a flag on the play, right? Because if you're not applying that across the board, we shouldn't apply it here, right? Focus on the work. So we've instituted what we call a flag on the play in our talent reviews, and that is for director level and above, right? And then once we put those names out, everyone, meaning the executive board and our teams, get to actually have conversations about those people. And if I don't know Serena, then it gives me an opportunity to say, well, let me get to know Serena, because we know that it's not just mentorship, it's sponsorship, right? And so we need to have that conversation as well. That's all internal. External, what we've done is really partner with our ERGs in an incredible way, because we have a great platform. When you think about the Knicks, when you think about the Rangers, when you think about all of our venues across the U.S., but also the future of our company, if you haven't done it yet, please check out the Sphere in Vegas. The future of our company is a tech company. So we're actually building this massive venue, live entertainment venue called the Sphere in Vegas. We own all the technology for it. We've created cameras, we've created new modalities of actually 5D. It is unreal. And that will be opening in 2023. And so when we talk about the future of our companies, what is the talent, what is the pipeline access that's needed for those positions, right? And so we're preparing that now. But we're using our platforms with the ERGs, through embedding that in our marketing partnerships. I was just at our marketing summit in Sag Harbor with all of our partners, including Chase, Hyundai, talking about all of the work that we're doing with D&I, because we're embedding it in our business verticals as well. So as you're thinking about how do we speak to new customers, we're actually conceptualizing that and working with the partners to actually do it. So it's a win-win for both groups. So those are just some of the things we're doing both internally and externally to make sure we're driving true change and sustainability.
Fantastic. Serena?
So, again, to keep it real and to just set more context, because everything that Demetrius just mentioned is it's definitely, it resonates, and it is something that, it should be part of all of our toolkits in terms of if you're a DEI, if you're specifically a DEI leader, but also just if you're a leader in terms of, performance reviews, incorporating those kinds of actions in it, having those conversations about career pathing. But so when I'm talking about keeping it real, I've only been at the Fox Foundation for 3 months, because I came from Catalyst, which is a global nonprofit that focuses on building more inclusive workplaces. And going back to what Radia was talking about the Great Resignation, I was one of them. I did it. So, but it wasn't because of, I didn't feel like I belonged, but more so that it was what we had mentioned earlier, which is that it was because I wanted to be more intentional and more directly impact workplaces and populations. Because, while I was at Catalyst, what we did was we really worked with the large corporations, multinational corporations, in terms of building out DEI strategy and talking exactly about those the tools and the processes that you use. And so one of the things that I would add to that, that's something that I always, emphasize with any company, organization that I was working with and what I'm doing now, is that, and it's something that, another reason why I feel that it's that this group, to talk to those in the communications industry is amazing, because it's communication. When I was going through the job search process and they asked me, what differentiates you from the other candidates, I was always able to say, I have communication skills, and that is critical. Because you have to be able to talk about all of these issues. It is very hard. It is very difficult to talk about some events that are happening in the world that are very personal to you. And when we talk about being able to bring your authentic self to the workplace, that's part of it. And so to build that, and I always say, so what you want to do is you need to get those skills around how to have those. You need to improve your interpersonal communication skills. You need to know how to have the conversations about career pathing. What is, and be very empathic when you, and listen. You have to also meet everybody where they're at. And and have that conversation and create that safe space, and and be able to focus it around, okay, so this is what's happening, but exactly to what you're talking about, Demetrius, when when you said, we're not even having the conversations about career pathing yet. You want to talk about something, police brutality and death and violence that's committed against people that look like us. It's just like, well, how do you do that? And so I would just say that everything that Demetrius said is what you should do, and layer onto that communication skills.
So, Demetrius, your flag on the plate just reminded me, and I've been quoting this, and I'm gonna have to Google who is it, who I can attribute it to. Actually, that culture eats strategy for breakfast, right? Because you can create the best strategy that you want, but if your culture is not addressed, if how you treat your employees is, what is the environment that you're setting for your employees is not addressed intentionally and unequivocally unapologetic in the way that you do that, then whatever strategy you put in place in your companies is not gonna work, right? Because to your point about people leaving companies, or people, as they say, oftentimes they don't leave companies, they leave managers, right, to that extent. But we're human beings, and that is typically how you want to affect. And I'll tell you a little bit of what we're doing in terms of that as companies, as a company, Comcast, NBC Universal, and Telemundo, what we're doing to address oftentimes the hardcore systemic change that we need to do in our company in order to create that culture. In the meantime, and they're not mutually exclusive, is we're working on a lot of the other stuff. Part of my role in the company is I manage our employee resource groups. So, and we have a company-wide, we have a very robust employee resource group base in the company. We have, on the NBC Universal side, we have 125 chapters. We have about 12,000 of our employees are engaged in at least one employee resource group. In the company, that's almost a third of the company that is engaged in at least one group. And I always say that my role is, as I manage these employee resource groups with my colleague, is how do we keep our employee resource group leaders, which we have about 230 leaders in the companies, how do we keep them enraged, right? In a good way, let me put that. How do we keep them enraged? How do we keep them engaged? And how do we keep them empowered? Because we have seen the George Floyd got murdered and the uprising that happened. our employees, our group, we had a solid base, solid foundation on those leaderships, but we have seen exponentially of how my employee resource group leaders, these individuals have demanded initiatives, have demanded programs, have demanded things from us, from a company, from executives in the company. But my role and our role should be, how do we keep them that, but making sure that those demands come from a place of empowerment and not entitlement, right? Because there's a fine line between empowerment and entitlement, and it is our role, basically, as we are creating this culture of inclusion, this culture of belonging, to make sure that, Pindale, I always say, recruiting is the easy part. I mean, as hard as that is, right, recruiting is easy. Is retention, is keeping people, is where it is the hard. I learned that when I was in higher ed, that we could recruit kids, but if we didn't place an environment where they could thrive in that competitive academic environment, they were gonna be dropping out after a year. It is the same in corporate America. It is the same in us, in what we do. We can recruit all we want, especially, look, media and entertainment. I laugh because, I was at Telemundo Center last week, and we had some folks that were at Univision just a few years ago. Some of our folks were to Univision, right? So it's a cycle, and we're gonna be seeing each other. Recruiting, I'll say, is easier. Let me just put it that way, not easy, easier, but it's the retention component. It is the culture that you set in your companies that is gonna determine if your employees are gonna thrive. Like, as a company, right, Demetrius and Serena talked about, yes, we have all of these programs in leadership development. We have partnered with our talent lab and our learning and development team. We have very specific curriculums, programs for Black director levels and above, for Asian director levels and above, and Latinos and Latinas right at director levels and above. It's Elevar, Amplified, and Shine, very targeted to that extent. But the reality is that and the cool thing about it is that on a very intentional level, we put sponsors to those individuals that are going through this program. Not mentors, sponsors, right? To Demetrius' point about what is the qualification on that. We certainly, many companies, as you know, over the last 2.5 years, made the commitment, created roles in diversity and inclusion, put a ton of money behind these initiatives, right? And if you're in this space, you will know full well that you get 1 or 2 calls a week or a month about new roles that are happening out there. For somebody who has been in the DEI space for over 25 years directly, I am heartened that that is the case. I'm excited that that is the case, but I'm also apprehensive, right? Because what is gonna happen 3 to 5 years from now? We talked about the challenges. What are the challenges from a company? I would say the challenges from an industry perspective is, how do we keep the momentum going on this? How do we keep the pressure going from a company perspective, from an employee perspective, in terms of what companies are doing? How can we be consistent, right, on a company? Look, I don't expect companies to put in our case, we put in a $100 million commitment. We're very deliberate in programs that assisted the community, the business community as well. A program called RISE, amazing program. Lift zones to give access to individuals to the internet, as well as writers, producers, directors programs in the company to keep elevating those voices. But the key here is, not only for my company, but yours, is what is gonna be the consistency and the intentionality 3 to 5 years down the line to keep addressing the issue of systemic change within your company, right? And I'll say to you, look at your leadership development nomination process within your company. Either you're in charge of it or you're not. Question it, because oftentimes those leadership development programs at director level and above are typically a nomination process, right? You have to be nominated to be a part of it. I question why. Why do you have to be nominated? And oftentimes the pushback, and by the way, we have made changes to that within the company, but oftentimes the pushback people get is like, well, because then everybody's gonna wanna go to it, right? I'm like, okay, Cool. It's like, cool, everybody wants it. So guess what that will prompt to happen, right? If you're a manager and you have an employee that says, hey, I heard about the Elevar program, how can I be in it? Can you nominate me? Can I be a part of it? You have two choices, either support it and say, absolutely, I want you to go with it, I'm gonna nominate you, or say, you need to work on some stuff before I can nominate you to that. And I think that that is the rub. Nobody wants to have that conversation with that individual to say, sorry, but you need to elevate your work. You need to do better before I feel comfortable in nominating you. So I always will push to say self-nomination, regardless of whatever leadership development program you have and at whatever level, self-nomination, it offers transparency. It offers an opportunity for employees to raise their hand. It offers an opportunity for your employees to feel that they're counted, right? It offers an opportunity for everybody to say, I have a chance to that. And guess what? If I suck at my job, then somebody has to tell me that I do and that I don't belong in that program, right? So again, culture, it's strategy for breakfast. As soon as I'm done with it, I'm gonna Google it to see who said it. But I'm sorry? Thank you very much.
Jessica, is there anything that you have put in place or Google has put in place to help with retention? You know, retention, like Salvador touched on, is a big, big issue right now.
In addition to some of the things that have already been shared, I mentioned before, we have a whole team dedicated to retention called the Stay and Thrive team. They're a group of about 20 people across our organization that work, one-on-one with individuals who feel like they're not actually thriving at Google, primarily focused on underrepresented groups. However, anyone can go to the retention team. And their job is really to provide support, resources, and guidance on how to, still feel like you can remain in your current role. If you feel like your role isn't a fit, but you don't want to leave the organization, how could, your skill set be repurposed in a different team or even in a different function? So that's kind of like not our primary, but like premier kind of group that, are like boots on the ground, working directly with individuals. There were a lot of thoughts shared around, embedding this work into your culture, making it more of the way that we do business versus just like moments or one-off things that are on the side. We do have a number of other efforts that are just simply the way that we work at Google. Two things I'll call out in particular. We have this program called the 20% program, where any Googler, that's what we call our employees, can sign up to participate on a 20% project. The time frame, it can be 3 months to ongoing. And the expectation is everyone has the opportunity to expand their skill set on any time for any project that's available for them to work on. And a 20% project can be everything from we're preparing a launch. You don't necessarily need any prerequisites in order to work on that, but more so just in agreement with your manager to make sure that you can kind of manage the additional work. So me as a DEI professional, if I wanted to work on like a product launch or do some marketing work or even learn how to code, there's opportunities for me to do that by just taking on a 20% project. And it's so much a part of the way that we work at Google that it's rare that it's questioned. Right. So, it's more so of a, hey, manager, here goes a heads up. I took on a 20% project with this group. We also have something called our Bungee program. And so think of this as like a secondment. This is an opportunity for anyone for determined period of time where you can take on another project full time for anywhere from 3 months to 6 months to 9 months or even beyond. This was originally designed to, again, help people expand their skill set beyond their current role. But a lot of times if someone goes on family leave, or if you don't necessarily have the headcount on your team, but you have an expectation for a program on a product launch and you need full-time support, people can apply to take on a bungee, and as long as you have manager approval, you can be reassigned to that project or that bungee for a determined period of time. And so these are very popular at Google. The 20% projects, again, it's just the way I feel like everybody has 20% project. I mean, I even taken on 20% projects. The bungee, there is manager approval there, obviously, because your manager doesn't get necessarily a replacement for you. So that might just be more kind of steps of approval. But Google, in its origin, had this mindset of, if you were good enough to work at Google, then you were probably good enough to do multiple roles, right? So that's very much a part of the ethos of our company. And even our hiring process is designed in that way where, your role related knowledge or your ability to do the role that you're currently being considered for is one attribute, and not the most important attribute in our hiring process, because we very much believe in, the reskilling, the upskilling, the, repurposing, because the mindset is, we're hiring for, cognitive ability, ability to be flexible in ambiguity, to have to be more of a generalist, right? So we can pivot, internally if we need be. And that's one of the things, quite frankly, I really do love about our culture, which why I think our retainment for the most part is pretty strong, simply because, people feel like their current role isn't the end of the road if it's not working out. And so those are some things that aren't exclusive to underrepresented groups. Anyone can take advantage of those opportunities, but as you can imagine, they are a lifeline for people who their current role, their current manager, their current team isn't necessarily working out for them, especially if they come from a marginalized community, that folks have taken advantage of that and found happiness elsewhere without leaving the company.
One more question before we open it up to questions, and I'll ask this to the entire panel. How do you measure success? And is there any metrics or tools that you use to measure what you think is success? And I'll start with Jessica, and we'll work our way down.
So given that we are a tech company, and what we essentially do, what we sell, what we organize, what we store, what we protect is data. We have a very strong kind of DEI data-driven approach to how we design our strategy, manage our success. And that's everything from the employee life cycle end to end. And this is more so of, number of applicants, people we interview, people we hire, what their onboarding process looks like, the amount of engagements they have through their process. We have climate surveys, we have other to pulse surveys. We're constantly, keeping a pulse on how our community is doing. I think with this focus on belonging, though, and I know most companies are doing that. So I know Google might probably collect more data and even share externally more data than most companies. Our diversity annual report is public. It's also now part of something called BigQuery, which you can basically benchmark your data against our data if your data is in BigQuery, and that's like kind of open sourced product that we offer. However, the belonging piece, I think, is really interesting because if you do look at the data, you're just looking at movement, right? Like, it doesn't really speak to the heart and soul of the community as it relates to how they feel about all the things that we're doing, how they feel about their own experiences. And so we are getting a lot more comfortable, or at least attempting to internally at Google, with really embracing qualitative data, right? So although we might see an uptick, right, because us being a tech company, we're like quantitative only matters. But, we may see an uptick in, at the top of the funnel as far as our candidate and what our pool, our pipelines that we've been pouring into for time. We're starting to see that in the amount of applicants we get. We definitely have seen an uptick in the amount of people that we hire, but people aren't, and the amount of resources and full-time people we put towards this work is remarkable. But people still aren't happy, at Google, and we like to think we're like the happiest place to work. So, that's disappointing. So the belonging data, I think we're trying to really better understand and put more value onto our qualitative data. So we've launched an entire campaign internally called our just kind of the search for belonging, to better understand what elements specifically in Google do people what does belonging mean to them? You know, how can we better integrate it within our culture and ultimately hold our leaders accountable? And that's currently in development.
Thank you. To Jessica's point about both qualitative and quantitative, from the qualitative piece, we have done a lot of focus groups, but we are really trying to drill down onto the question of what is belonging, right? What is happiness? If you're saying your career is not being developed, what do you think, what does development look like for you? Because it's creating this vacuum that you could be searching for something or trying to solve a problem that you can't truly identify. And I think there's pre-COVID and there's post-COVID. What we know, and the data is beginning to come out now, that employees are now looking to their companies to fill the gaps of maybe churches, community. So things that we did before COVID, we are now looking for our companies to do that. Well, now the companies are saying, well, wait, hold on, maybe I can't be that to you, right? And so what we are doing is not just looking at the focus groups, but really coming up with this contract, this really cool expectation list of what you can expect from us, right? Here's what you can expect from us, and here's what we want to expect from you, and hopefully we can meet somewhere in the middle, so I'm not trying to search out and find out, well, who's happy in this group, who's not happy, and what can I do to solve that, right? Because if we're making rules for the rule breakers of those three people, then it creates this kind of vacuum where we can't really drive the change that we want. So from a qualitative piece, that's what we've been doing, really leaning on our ERGs, and we take the data from our pulse survey, which my team leads every single year, to then do a debrief by groups. And so we've partnered with a company called Perceptics. They're absolutely great. They've created dashboards for us so we can understand what the trouble spots are, what the hot spots are, not just by division, but by department and leader. Right? So we can drill down into teams, which is really important. And out of that, we also have a belonging index, a diversity and inclusion index. So there are questions that are built into our pulse survey that kind of point to belonging. So that's one of the things we're doing from a quantitative piece. In addition to that, you heard about onboarding, and obviously we use diverse slates as well, but we're also drilling into what is the definition of a diverse slate, right? And what does the data show is actually 2 or more. Now, if you throw one woman on there, you got 50 other candidates, then it's diverse. It's not really how it works. And really drilling into what does diversity look like for your group, right? Because if you're in highly technical roles that traditionally we've not had a lot of underrepresented groups in those roles, then how do we solve for that? So it's not just a blanketed approach, it's definitely business by business. And then the last piece is we have a pretty robust people analytics program. So we have a gentleman who leads a whole team of folks who are developing dashboards for our leaders. So you will be able to see what does the demographics look like by your department and division. In addition to that, when we're thinking about career development, who's actually investing in learning, who's actually attending certain programs. So you can actually see that in one dashboard. So it's really exciting, and all of this stuff is underway. Yeah.
So in addition to everything that Jessica and Demetrius just said, which is, you have to look at both quantitative and qualitative data. You look at the lead and lag measures, and you definitely have to drill down. It's also, I think what I would just add to that is also think about the small wins that you can, because again, this is a long, it's not something where you're going to say, okay, I'm finished. You're never finished, which can be a little bit just like, whoa. But you're never finished, because this is such a positive thing, because you're always you're always creating culture, and you're always building that sense of belonging, which is something that I think is really positive. And so in order to maintain that and have that optimistic viewpoint. I call myself an optimistic realist, because, I recognize that it is, never ending, yet at the same time, I think that that's a good thing, because it means that you can always change. And the way that you keep that optimism up is by looking at the small, looking at small wins and finding those small wins. So when you set up you have your representation targets and what have you, but look at, the small wins can be in that, okay, so I have a position here and I have to hire. So, let's look at what the pool is, and just keep constantly looking at those kinds of measures. Like, how diverse was the pool? Did I set up a process so that it is, that it's not just the pool that's diverse, but that who interviewed the candidates was diverse, because that gives you the diverse perspectives. And then afterwards, always go back and do a debrief and take a look. Okay, so, so when I hired this time, I had X number of candidates, and this is what the result was. Let's compare it to, so do that kind of benching versus just numbers. Because if you just look at if you're just waiting to hit that goal, you can get discouraged. So just find those small wins that you can take all the way through and just keep at it, and it'll be really popular. It'll happen, and then use those communication skills and communicate that out to your colleagues, because they can do it. It goes back to every single one of us can and should be inclusive leaders, and this is how you do it.
30 seconds, so hopefully we have one or two questions on this. Yeah, qualitative, quantitative, absolutely. If you're that, you said what gets measured gets done, right, to that extent. But I also see what does success look like for me. I see it as very fluid, right? Because to your point about those wins, I see it as our creators, our showrunners, our filmmakers gonna choose Universal Studios, NBC Universal as the place for them to be, because they feel that this is the company that is really gonna let them tell their stories the way that they want to, and that we're gonna support that, right? I mentioned the RISE business program supporting business in the community. The business is better because that economic reciprocity that the company invested in those small business and micro grants, is that making them successful? Are the lift zones creating that access to the community in a successful way and giving access for individuals to get on, right? Are my colleagues feel a more sense of empowerment and belonging in the company because of what we do and how we advocate for their voices in the company? All of that, right, is fluid. And even within that, if you're successful, if you feel that you're successful on that, then evaluate it and double it down, right? Because those are the things that I think will make you as a company successful.
Thank you. Do we have any questions? We have time for one or two questions. Lynette, where's Carrie's gonna bring the microphone to you.
First of all, excellent content. So my question is, how are you working with, you talked about culture and you talked about belonging. How are you handling that at my company, we have teams, they've never met. They've never been to the building. They've never seen the studios. They've never seen anything. So they don't know the culture that we have. And when we say back in the day, they're like, ooh, whatever. So how are you handling that part where they don't know the culture and they don't feel, the ERGs? I mean, how are you handling that part?
For us in this virtual environment, quite frankly, is somewhat facilitates for us to be connected, right? Our Black Employee Network group back in 2020, probably by mid-June, started a Village Talks. And this basically were just open forums that our Black Employee Network group leaders were hosting people. They did it by locations, oftentimes where there was a Dallas, NBC, Telemundo stations, and the executive committee of that station was there. Everybody was joining in and just having conversations, building community, letting it out, right? To that extent. It facilitates. Eventually, our APA group started doing a Village Talks, right? Because you saw the rise of violence against the Asian community still happening to this extent, right? Our out group as well started those around the issue of the Don't Say Gay bill and how we as a company are reacting or being proactive or not on those issues, right? And when the Uvalde massacre happened, Unidos created that environment as well. I think that virtual facilitates it. Now I think we're getting into the point of, oh, it's a virtual, in person, right? Is getting adjusted to that to see what is the element that we do. But I will say I leverage my employee resource groups to do stuff in the company because they are driving it. And that is basically where you can connect more people, expose more people as well.
Awesome. So Charles McKenzie from Cox Communications. So I'm wondering how are you guys working with, I feel like we see right now like HBCUs and all these different companies are trying to reach out, do this engagement. How are you guys from a technology company, is diversity and inclusion actually working with the technology groups? Because even at my company, you know, I may be one of few blacks, right, in technology, but are you guys being very intentional about going and working with like the different sourcing groups that provide resources? So how are you guys partnering with technology?
To share here, we have a number of activations at Google. I mean, probably our most public is, you know, our kind of, I think it was like $50 million recent commitment to HBCUs. However, you know, there are a number of partnerships that we have established. We have an entire like DEI talent outreach team that their entire roles are to build relationships with groups like NSBE, et cetera, to ensure that they're aware and kept in the loop about events that we have, you know, that are, you know, essentially DEI recruiting events, but, you know, to ensure that we're communicating about open roles. You know, Google, I feel like for a long time hasn't necessarily worked with like sourcing groups specifically, only because we have an expansive, you know, talent recruitment team that we put a lot of pride and stock and resources into. But I feel like within the last couple years, we've realized, right, in order for us to continue to increase the pipeline, we need to build more partnerships with sourcing companies that specialize in this. So that's something that we've started to develop in the last few years. It hasn't really been a part of our talent development plan talent outreach plan, to be honest. But, you know, to answer your question, we do have partnerships with groups, but, you know, if there are additional groups that, you know, you would recommend for us to work with, like, we're definitely always open to build those relationships, because I recognize, again, like, we've had an approach of like, we can handle it all, you know, and we started to realize that we can't, so.
That, you know, because I mean, honestly, we're not where we need to be, anybody, you know, just universally, we're not where we need to be. But the key is that it's about the sourcing, to, you know, what Jessica is talking about, that, you know, what I always say is that what you got to do is open that pool up, you know, in terms of finding the sources, that in looking at the roles that you need to fill, and getting that, you know, making sure that the job description is, you know, stripped of biases as much as it can be, and then getting it into the different sources, not only the HBCUs, but there's a Latino university and colleges network. There's a Native and Indigenous university and colleges network. So there are, you know, and it's all about that. It's that you have to, and, you know, you can have the partnerships, but then you got to drill down and get in detailed about, okay, well, what are you doing with that partnership? You know, are you using it as a way to, you know, to put out your job descriptions and your opportunities? So it goes to sourcing, and that's what, you know, we're doing. That's what I always recommend everybody to do, is really open up your sources of talent.
One last question. Hi, my name is Doreen Alpin. I'm with Mitchell Mentor. I do crisis management. So I work on the DEI side when it goes wrong. You know, when employees, like especially post John Floyd, when people are reaching out to reporters after companies would express put their diversity statements out, and then their diversity house wasn't in order. So I wanted to know, like we were talking about the collection of data, how do you navigate the legal risk of collection of data and information you collect and the risk of being sued?
I think from a perspective, right? Every data and we do put an annual report, our impact report. You can go online and see it. We're very transparent in the way that we provide those numbers. But the reality is that there's also internal. We talked about dashboards and we talked about analytics within the company, that having those conversations with internal executive leadership to say, to have that. But to your point, there's legal involved, there's HR involved, because those are oftentimes data that serves the purpose for us to push through what we need to do as a company. But yeah, legal is involved and HR is involved.
And that's the thing, you always have to talk to your colleagues. It's a way that you are collaborating. You collaborate with your legal team, you collaborate with your, the HR department, you collaborate, with the business units. The laws are pretty broad. I mean, it's kind of interesting, because, and the way that that I always approach it is that, okay, this is actually an opportunity to exercise our creative skills, not in a bad way, but in terms of, okay, so this is what we want to do. This is the information that we want to get, but we want to do it within the framing of the law. Yep. And you can do it. Even it can be done.
And that is the message, right? Don't let companies, executives say, oh my God, no, we cannot discuss that data because it's discoverable. No, you can get your legal department involved and they can make it client privilege, attorney privilege. So there's a way, because having a deeper discussion on data within your company is like, it's the family, right? You're having a discussion with your family about what needs to get done, and having that raw data discussion internally under those premises would allow you, quite frankly, to move on. You cannot dismiss it. You cannot neglect it. Yes, there's data that we put out there in our reports, but I will dare say that, yes, there's also data that we talk internally because it serves its purpose.
I just want to add a little bit more context here, just to kind of give you how this translates in a real world scenario, and also being at Google, given that nothing gets done at Google without data. Some comments I shared earlier around everyone owns DEI. This is such a point of contention internally in our organization, because we're such a data-driven organization, and everyone owns DEI. Then you get like individual contributors, people managers at kind of mid-level. It's like, I want to see the data on how my org is doing. And, we can't necessarily give them data on their specific team. And so if we can't anonymize the data, then they can't see it. So our data policy internally is, unless you are a vice president or you're sitting on top of an org of several hundred people where the data can be anonymized, you can't see like the granular data around, like how many women, underrepresented groups, et cetera, like exist in your organization. Instead, you see insights, right, that give the story or the sentiment around the data. And so Demetrius mentioned a belonging index. We have an inclusion index, which really speaks to those sentiments. So if you think about Google, you see it across Google wide, right? Not only just our, data that we put on our website of percentages over time and leadership levels and tech roles, non-tech roles, et cetera, right? Like your standard, and also what that looks like around the globe. That's really driven by kind of compliance, company data, what we can and can't collect depending on what country we're in. We also have something called self-ID, where people can opt in and then also give us permission to share certain things publicly. Also, right, but it still needs to be anonymized. The insights, however, might be women in leadership roles don't feel like they have clear career progression paths to executive leadership, right? And so that's the insights that we share that are consistent enough across an organization. So Google's kind of like a company made up of like other companies, probably similar to everyone on this panel. So we have Google-wide data, and then we have like YouTube versus cloud versus ads versus search versus net, like all the different kind of like smaller divisions or smaller companies within Google. So you can see those insights in the data at the Google-wide level, and then at the kind of like what we call product area level or division level. And then anything below that, if you're a VP that sits on an organization, I believe it's like 300 or more people, then you can see a click down into the like particular area within that division you see. But other than that, managers and individual contributors only see the Google-wide and the kind of like the mini company-wide data, right? And those insights, however, are actionable. And that's what we're trying to drive the campaign internally around. You might not necessarily need to know how many women are in your organization, but what you need to know that the women don't feel like they belong, right? And so that's the role that everyone can play. And we all know that we need more representation. So you don't necessarily need to see the percentages to get to understand that, right? Because statistically across 170,000 person organization, women in leadership roles are underrepresented in every area, right? So like more is more here, right? And so we do a lot of socializing to get people to not want to see like their particular scorecard, but more so like action the insights and understand that everything they do as it relates to increase sentiments, increase, hiring, et cetera, increase promotions are all on the pathway to realizing our DEI goals. So I just felt like I wanted to say that because this is like an ongoing conversation for years internally, and I'm sure many of you are grappling with the same thing. But the insights are important as well. We can't discount them without seeing like percentages or raw numbers.
I'll just say this too. From MSG's perspective, 30 seconds, we're pretty much aligned, right? The only thing I would say is, one, we have the inclusion and the belonging index, but we've put together a governance structure around our dashboards that it's only really seen by our employment law and the very senior most members of the organization, and even that is whittled down to a certain subset for every reason that we can imagine, right? So we partner very closely with employment law, but at the heart of our governance structure is what is actionable. I don't know if you've kind of noticed with my style is very similar to MSG. Like, we're like, what can we actually do about it? Not like just talk about it. And so giving you numbers, if you're not going to take action on it, how impactful is that, right? Or what other people have done is say, well, I can't take action until I see the numbers. No, that's not true, right? Because you have the insights, right? So sometimes getting data can be a barrier to progress in a weird way, as crazy as it sounds, because people want to use that as an excuse to either not take action or not do anything when you clearly know, anecdotally, based on qualitative data, that there's no women in the room, right? So do you need numbers to share that with you, or can you look around, right? So we've been able to kind of find the middle ground there, but we are in lockstep with our employment attorneys.
We need more time to discuss all of this. I mean, such great information was shared. I'm going to be watching the recording back and sharing it with the leaders at my company, because this is just, I mean, these are gems, these are jewels. This was such a great panel. I want to thank the panelists for sharing with us. Thank you so much. Great information. Everyone, thank you for joining us for this breakout session. I hope everyone learned something and had a great time.